All right. Cool. Welcome to Nebula. This is going to be kind of a different type of video than what you typically see on the main YouTube channel, because I'm going to try to not, well, I'm going to try to adjust my seat first. It's not going to be as edited. It's going to be a little more raw of me kind of diving into some sort of material about something that I can maybe demonstrate a little bit for. We can talk about the musical components of. You know, it's really just going to be a little bit less of a formal video, something where we can dive a little deeper over maybe a longer period of time. So I hope you enjoy that. Thank you so much for being here and checking this out. And our first subject matter that we're going to deal with is none other than Snarky Puppy, Cory Henry on Lingus, one of the most popular things that I think Snarky Puppy has ever put out, if I'm not mistaken. It's just a fantastic solo, really a prolific solo. And if you caught my video about solos that almost made me quit piano altogether, this was definitely on that list. It didn't necessarily make me want to quit, but it was just one of those things where I saw it and I was just like, I don't know how a person does it. I just don't know how somebody becomes this unbelievably proficient and good and has this titanic grip on harmony and rhythm. It's just unbelievable. So I thought we would dive into a little bit about this solo. Now, what this is not going to be is an analysis of the harmonic content, so to speak, on like a really specific level. The reason for that is, quite honestly, it's been done, and you can easily go and find that on YouTube. There's a few really, really great videos. One by David Bruce. You can find him on YouTube by going to David Bruce Composer. He put out a fantastic video all about this solo specifically, and a lot of the content inside of the solo and where some of it is based, where some of it comes from, you know, kind of some of the harmony that seems to be present in the solo. David put out a fantastic video about all of that. So if you want to know specifics about the harmonic content, we're going to talk about some of it, but it's going to be a little more general and a little more aimed at how you can apply similar concepts in a similar style of soloing. So check out David's video on that for sure. I'll find some way to kind of direct, or if it's you can just put it into YouTube, you'll find it for sure. And the other thing too is that there are a couple of transcriptions that people have done. One is by Jacob Martin. And again, if you search Cory Henry Lingus Jacob Martin, you will find his video, which is fantastic. That happened to be the transcription that I found that was super helpful. But in David Bruce's video, he refers to another person who transcribed the solo as well, named David Rogers, and you can find links to that as well. So I just want to make sure that I point you in the direction of everything you'll need to know if you're looking for a full-blown transcription. How can we take some of this information, some of these harmonic ideas, and develop our ability to play in a similar manner to how Cory is approaching his solo, and kind of just like utilize different harmonic concepts on what is essentially a 4-chord vamp. So first and foremost, let's talk about what we're dealing with here. So the bass line is consistent throughout the entire solo, and it's an interesting rhythmic thing. It kind of, so we all know what it sounds like at this point. It's this. All right, and it's that vamp repeated over and over and over again. My guess is that it's probably just open in terms of how it's written in the music. So when they went to record it or rehearse it or compose it, whatever, they probably just said, here's this section, it's wide open to play over, and we'll just vamp it forever and ever and ever until we decide we want to move on. So that's typically how I would approach writing something like that in terms of what does the music say, what does the chart say. So that's my guess in terms of how it's written. And essentially it's 4 chords. We're dealing with an E minor sound, moving down to a C major 7 sound, to an A minor sound, to an F major sound. Now, there's a very interesting key about all of this. It's not a pun, I promise. So we have this, but watch this. Let's move to C major. Let's move to A minor. F major. Right? So you can tell just by kind of what we're doing already that it's a lot of the same type of sound. Now, that's important for a couple of reasons. And probably the most obvious one is that it means we're completely free harmonically, because we have a set of sounds that applies to all of the chords, but we can really from there kind of go anywhere we want to add interesting sounds as we move about the solo. Now, that's what we see Cory do, and in David's video, he talks a lot about how Cory utilizes many block chord chromatic movements, things like this. You know, those are all kind of just like sliding around chromatically. The beginning of Cory's solo where he plays all those incredibly beautiful and lush chords. It's a lot of that kind of stuff going on, and David's video really kind of explains a lot about what that is. In short, we're using something generally called the bebop major scale. So you can see it's just a major scale with the addition of the sharp 5 in between the 5 and the 6. And what that does is it makes it fit into a measure, first of all, 2, 3, 4, 1, right? So it fits nicely into a rhythmic sort of thing, and we can also take that and sort of draw from it, well, what are these chords that we could kind of float between as we move up the scale? Now, if we look at what's built, so let's take the chord tones, for example. So we have C, E, and G, 1, 3, 5, and of course we have that repeated up top. Well, we also have the 6. All right, so those that might be what you consider to be the chord tones here. Now, from that we have all the ones in between. Well, let's see what those spell out. Well, it happens to spell out a D diminished chord, right? So what that means is that as we move around this scale, we can flip between those two chords. And we're going to be using different inversions of them, of course, depending on where we are. But it's a really great way to move around. When you have a chord tone, you're playing the chord because it fits right in. And then when you have an in-between tone, you can play that other chord that kind of goes in between, and it really makes it flow together. Check this out. It's a really nice way to move around a scale in a harmonically interesting, pleasing manner. We can sort of take apart what that all is, because, for example, that's D diminished, but that's F diminished, G sharp diminished, B diminished. Wait a second, they're all the same chord. Yeah, they are. They're the exact same chord. And that is... There are only 3 diminished scales, right? And essentially 3 diminished chords in the sense that they use all the same notes. So for example, we just pointed out how D diminished is the same notes as F diminished, is the same notes as G sharp diminished, is the same notes as B diminished. That's why it kind of works so well that way. It almost sounds like we're flipping between the same 2 chords when we're moving up the scale. Right? So these are all keys that are extremely useful, and it shows us the flexibility of the different chords that we're working with and all the ways that we can kind of utilize those chords in more of a free manner, because they are very similar. I mean, we showed how the 4 chords of the vamp are all basically the same, and about how if we want to move around in that chromatic fashion, well, we're kind of utilizing a similar concept. Those are all the same chords, even though technically maybe they're different, right? So this stuff is all sort of pointing to the fact that harmony is extremely flexible. And you can really take something simple and add a lot of interesting sound to it, especially when it's as uniform and wide open as this particular chord progression is. Those chords are very, very, very similar, and in a lot of the same notes they work. They share many common tones. Common tones being, of course, notes that exist in one chord. You know, they exist in multiple chords across the chord progression. So this is loaded with common tones. And one thing that we find that works very well throughout the duration of this chord progression is this E minor pentatonic sound. E minor pentatonic, of course, could be looked at as G major pentatonic. It just depends on where are you at any given moment. So let's look at very quickly how E minor pentatonic relates to each of these chords in the progression, because this E minor sound is one that we see Cory come back to time and time again in the solo. So let's look at it. Obviously in E minor, it's just straight, E minor pentatonic. And then if we move down to C major, it becomes more of like, it's essentially the C major scale, we just have not defined the fourth. So in that scale, we also don't really use, C doesn't exist in E minor pentatonic, so technically it's not there, but because the chord is C major, we can kind of assume that it's going to be C and certainly not C sharp. So if we're assuming that it's C, the only thing that's not defined at that point is the fourth. It could be either natural or sharp. If we look at C major, for example, let's take our E minor pentatonic. And then again, we have our C in the bass, so that's fairly well defined. But what about the fourth? Well, okay, if we were going to fill it out, all right, so we're starting from E minor pentatonic, we know we have the C, but how are we going to complete this scale? Well, let's just do it by sound. I don't like that. It just doesn't, it doesn't sound right to me. I'm trying to think, hey, if it's in context, would it work? Yeah, I don't really think that that's the right sound. It doesn't really have the same sort of, it just doesn't fit, But let's try a sharp 4 there. That to me slots in perfectly. It sounds like it was meant to be there, which if we look back at E minor, again, now we're starting with E minor pentatonic. Let's do the same thing, okay? If we add that F in, it's either F or F sharp. In this case, it's going to be our second. So we're looking at either a natural second or a flat second, a minor second, right? So a flat second would be this. Again, it just doesn't feel like it fits. It doesn't feel right to me. Well, let's try the natural second in that E minor sound. That fits perfectly, which makes sense because, if we're starting from E pentatonic, E minor pentatonic, if we were to fill that out, we could fill it out to E natural minor. We could fill it out to E harmonic minor. We could fill it out to E melodic minor. We could fill it out to E Dorian. All of them are using that natural second, the F sharp there. So it kind of makes sense that when we move from the E minor to the C major, we would still be using that F sharp. And as we saw in actual usage, the F natural just doesn't really fit with either chord. Okay, so, but keep this in mind because think about where we're going 2 chords from now. Well, we're going from the C major down to an A minor, and then where? An F. So at some point there's going to be a flip where that F is gonna start to make sense and we're not actually gonna wanna use the F sharp. So there are some distinctions between these different chords, even though there are many, many similarities, and in a lot of ways we can play pretty much the same notes. We have already demonstrated how E minor pentatonic works across all 4 chords. So we could sit there over this and just play even when we change chords. Oh, sorry, that was a C, that's not E minor pentatonic. That's like a line, isn't it? So you can see how E minor pentatonic really works across all 4 chords. However, we've demonstrated that the first 2 chords, that F sharp is a really, really great fit. Let's add that into those first 2 chords. I just played completely the wrong thing. Anyways, let's start that again. It'll add in from E minor to C major 7, and we're going to use the F sharp. Okay, so you can see how those 2 chords, we could kind of mess around with E minor pentatonic with the addition of the F sharp, and it works really well. But at some point, like we said, we're gonna have to make that switch to where F sharp doesn't make sense anymore, and we kind of move over to an F natural sound. Where does that happen? Well, let's go to our next chord and find out. A minor. What are we gonna use here? Well, we know the E minor pentatonic works fine. In the context of A minor, we kind of have this sort of like A minor 7, there's the 9th in there, the 11th, A minor 11 basically, I guess you could call it. Which sounds beautiful, and it's perfect in this setting. So let's answer the question of what is the F sharp gotta be here? Okay. Yet again, I'm finding that to not really work for me. There might be a way to get it to work. Just as it is, though, I find that that's not, it's not doing it for me. I'm trying to think. Well, let's start from E minor, and we'll play a little bit with the E minor pentatonic plus the F sharp. And then we'll get to A minor, and we'll add in the F natural. So we'll get rid of the F sharp, and we'll change it to an F natural. We'll just see if it makes any sense at all. No, it's not working. It just is not the right sound there. So that leads me to believe that if we switch that to an F sharp, we're still going to be right in that perfect sort of harmonic cohesion type of sound. Let's try that again, and we'll keep it F sharp this time. There it is. Perfect. Yeah, that sounds really good. So that leads me to believe that the only place where we're really changing it is down to the F natural, the F major sound. Because now if we play an F sharp here, it's tough. You could make it work. It's a little bit difficult. That would be that would be Jacob Collier's sharp 15. Which has a place and a time when it would work probably really well. It would sound very interesting. But if we're talking about the most basic approach to this particular chord progression, for me, it's not going to be sharp 15. It's going to be that regular straight, just, tonic root that is the F natural. So what we've just determined is that for all 4 chords, we have a pretty basic application of a scale that we know is going to work very well. Now, even though we're using an F natural, the scale itself still has the B natural in it, whereas the F major scale is B flat. If we tried to do the natural scale, it would not, the regular major scale wouldn't really work. Let me show you that. So we're going to go E minor pentatonic plus that F sharp for each of the first 3 chords. And then on the last chord, we're just going to play straight F major, and you'll see how kind of weird and out of place it is. It's funny because I probably would try that as sort of a new harmonic sound at some point in the solo, because I do think it sounds interesting right there. And I think that there's definitely a place where maybe if you're sticking to that E minor pentatonic with the F sharp sound and you want to drop it into something very different for the F natural chord, that major scale could be interesting, because probably the go-to choice as a bass point in this context is going to be F Lydian. Lydian, of course, containing the sharp 4, like this. Okay, so if we're using F Lydian there, that's going to make the most sense. Let's do that again. We'll play all the first 3 chords using E minor pentatonic plus the F sharp, and then we'll play F Lydian for that 4th chord. So you can see it's a very basic sound and it works. So if you were to want to play over these 4 chords, set yourself up with like a little vamp with that bass line, the E minor pentatonic sound is going to work very well overall. And for the first 3 chords, we're going to use the F sharp. And for the last chord, we're going to use basically an F Lydian scale. And if you stuck to that, you'd be pretty safe. Everything would sound right. It would all sound good. The notes would sound correct. So that kind of lays the groundwork. But here's the thing, of course. We don't want it to just sit there and sound correct, because probably by now you've already sort of gone, okay, well, this is the same sound over and over and over again. I'm bored, which you should be, because we don't want to play the same sound over and over and over again for every chord and never have any variation. That is where the vamp is very handy, because it is built like that in a way where all the chords are kind of more or less the same. The same sound over all 4 chords works pretty well. It's built that way for a reason, okay? And this is, if we're talking about jazz eras, this would fall under modal jazz. So this was very much popularized by John Coltrane, the John Coltrane Quartet, the Miles Davis, maybe the Miles Davis second quintet. McCoy Tyner, in terms of piano players, McCoy Tyner was really kind of like the guy that sort of laid a lot of the groundwork and pioneered this sound very, very much so. And that is taking a single chord and jumping around all over the place and playing some really interesting chromatically dissonant sounds as a way, what we call in jazz, we call it playing out. And it's like, that's, the cool thing to do. Oh man, like play the changes and then play outside the changes. And, it's you can get into stereotypes and goofy things about, jazz memes and whatever. But the reality is it really works. It's a very interesting way to incorporate a new sound to kind of give your ear something else to chew on. Because as we said, if I'm just playing that E minor pentatonic over every single chord and then only making that change from E minor pentatonic to F Lydian, which is more or less the same chord, it's not really that different. Playing those same kind of sounds over and over again, it gets old. Look, you can already tell. Like, what am I gonna do? Am I gonna just keep playing that over and over again? You know? And it doesn't mean it doesn't sound nice. It's just like, okay, we've kind of been there and done that at this point, and we don't really need to hear that again. So how are we going to introduce new sounds? Well, McCoy, he really popularized this new type of sound where it would be all over this one sound. Where it was very free to kind of move in all types of different directions and explore totally different types of harmonies, even if they were extremely dissonant in comparison to what was actually going on harmonically in the tune. And what that did is it kind of blew open a whole can of worms, and now it became like, oh, that actually sounds really cool. You mean we can really play around with different harmonies and just totally abandon whatever key changes are going on, or lack thereof, at any given time, and explore our own harmonic ideas. And not that McCoy was necessarily the first person to do this, but it was definitely part of a movement that was popularizing the idea of leaving chord changes, leaving a dedicated structure behind, and attempting to be a little more free in the application of harmony. So if we pull it back to Lingus and this chord progression, this vamp that we have going on here, we're not using one chord throughout like many modal jazz tunes, but we are using 4 different chords that, like we've demonstrated thus far, are extremely, extremely similar. And many of the same exact applications of scales and sounds will work over all 4 chords. So in a way, you could kind of look at it as, well, it's basically one chord. All in sort of this E minor center, this tonal center of E minor. So what that brings us to is the freedom to move around harmonically in all kinds of different ways, not being attached to any particular sound. And we see that in Cory's solo very often, as you'll see in the transcriptions in David Bruce's video. He describes all kinds of different movements, different harmonic explorations. There are times when he really kind of explores and goes super outside, but that's more kind of when things are getting kind of crazy, and instead of focusing on harmonic movements here and there, maybe it's something as simple as a chromatic motion. Well, that is a harmonic movement, but I just mean it's not like there are times when it gets kind of out, and it's not really that Cory is thinking, oh, I'm gonna go to A flat, and now I'm going to go to B flat, and now I'm going to go to E, and now I'm going to go to, it's more like I'm going to grab this motion, maybe it's a harmonic motion, and I'm going to move in that harmonic motion. What the actual tonal centers are of every single one of those chords isn't really as important. This is something, not to get off topic here, but this is something that I found to be helpful in learning how to kind of approach solos differently. Because you get bored. And like I've been demonstrating here, if you're just gonna play the same sound over those 4 chords, you're gonna get bored. And so your audience might get bored as well. And it's like, okay, how do you introduce new sounds? Well, playing out, so to speak, can be looked at in a number of ways. There are some devices that we can use. In fact, maybe some of the most common are like chromatic. You can get some very interesting clashes that way that you can work with. Another thing is whole steps. McCoy used that one a lot, and it sounded incredible. So my point is that there are devices that we can use in different ways. But I've always found there to be a little bit less of thinking about tonal centers, in the sense that if I'm in E and I'm trying to play out, I'm not necessarily going to go, well, I'm going to play in the key of A flat, and then I'm going to play in the key of G flat, and then I'm going to play in the key of B, and then I don't find that to be the thought, at least not for me. I don't find that to be the thought process as much. I find it more to be based on some of those motions that we just discussed, the chromatic motions, the whole tone motions. Maybe you're thinking of an interval. So if I'm in, I don't know, say I want to play a tritone away. A tritone of E is B flat. So what would it sound like if I messed around in the key of B flat? Yeah, that could be really interesting. So it's less about, well, the chord, we're going to insert a chord progression in a certain key here, and that's how we're going to play out. Not that you can't do that, but I just find that to be the thought process, not as much as is just looking at it as motion, you know? And we see that in Cory's solo. There's some things where there's a motion, maybe there's a figure that's moving chromatically. Like we said, a lot of these chords that are moving in there, it's not quite the bebop scale. It's a little more involved than that, but the idea is very similar. It's a chromatic motion, and so we see those motions being used, and I feel like that is more common of an application than is thinking more specifically through like chords themselves. I guess, does that make sense? So if we think about playing over these 4 chords in that manner, where we know we want to get away from, but it's kind of like, okay, well, what do we do? Let's mess around with a couple of things I just mentioned. How about chromatic? Well, if we go up chromatic, well, that's definitely clashing. And if you kind of brushed on that for a moment before moving away from it, that could be really interesting. How about down? Again, very clashing. These aren't things that you really maybe want to sit on for an extended period of time, but brushing by them as a movement towards something else could be very interesting. What if I went, let's do that motion, so up a half step, and then let's move in whole steps. So we're in our sort of tonal center here. I'm going to move up a half step, and then we're going to move that in whole steps. That's weird. You know, so it's like, okay, well, you could get some usage out of that. You could try some different things that are maybe based on that motion. The chromatic motion, like we pointed out, that works as well. There's a whole bunch of different ways that you can escape the boundaries of that E minor pentatonic sound that we've established is kind of our base point, right? So, you know, what are some other things we could do? Let's take that tritone example that I really need a haircut. This is getting so bad. Let's take that tritone example that we said. So we're going to play an E a little bit, and then we're going to mess around. We're going to kind of float into B flat, and then we're going to escape out of that, maybe back into E or something. Okay, so that was interesting. I kind of found that after hitting that B, my brain just wanted to go to C before resolving back to that E minor pentatonic, E minor 11 type of sound. There you go. I mean, that's a motion that you could use to throw something very interesting harmonically into the solo at any given time. You can kind of chew on that B flat sound for a minute and then move away from it somehow. So, you know, there are a lot of different tools like that you can utilize to free yourself up from needing to be so locked into a certain chord progression or a certain sound within a chord progression. We don't have to play E minor pentatonic the whole time. We can play so many different things, even if the rest of the band is still playing this sound. Maybe just switch a minor chord to major. Right? Instead of E minor, let's play E major. What about switching a major to a minor? That could be interesting too. I've never done that before. Let me try that again. That was actually cool. Okay, so we originally go E minor to C major to A minor to F major. So we're going minor, major, minor, major. Let's flip it. Let's go major, minor, major, minor. So we're gonna play E major to C minor to A major to F minor. I can already hear that is really interesting. Let's see if we can kind of make it at all fluid. I don't know. Whoa. Ooh. That one's interesting. I could probably find a better way to do that. Okay, so I really, really love this sound of going from F minor to E major. Wow. That to me is really cool. I like that transition a lot. So you can see it's the same chords in terms of root notes, but we flipped the quality. We went from minor to major or from major to minor, and holy wow, what a completely different sound that is. I mean, think about the different ways you could explore just using that, just by flipping the quality of a chord. And we have not left the same root function. We're still going E to C to A to F. So you can see how like there are so many different ways to escape the total just monotony of playing a very one chord, one sound type of thing. So to kind of loop it all back to Cory's solo, the way that you are seeing this super elaborate, harmonically interesting solo develop based on just 4 chords that, to be totally honest, don't have a whole lot of variation in terms of harmonic content. This is what he's doing, okay? Now, he's gonna have certain things that are in his experience, his I guess, arsenal of devices to play with, some of which I'm sure are the ones that we've discussed here in this video, others I'm sure that he uses that I haven't even thought of. And so everybody's got different tools, but the idea is you really are free to mess about with the harmony how you like when we have such a consistent mono kind of sound going on. Even though there's 4 chords, like we said, they're all very, very, very similar. And so that actually is a huge opportunity. It's giving you a blank canvas that you can mess around with in any way you want. So try some of these things, right? So try like, okay, well, if I'm playing an E, what happens if I just switch the quality? That right there was literally just switching back and forth from E minor to E major over and over again. And what an interesting sound that is, you know, making that transition, or, you know, doing something like, okay, well, let me grab a tritone away and mess around in that sort of tonal center, even with the E and the bass. So that's going to be B flat, super cool. We could do a lot with that. So you see how there are endless ways to introduce interesting harmonic devices, even when there's not a lot of harmonic content to go on written into whatever it is that you're playing. Now, one other thing I wanted to touch on is the rhythmic content of the solo, because we have a number of different things to take a look at that are all, I mean, unbelievable and incredibly good usages of so many different devices. First thing I want to talk about is at the beginning. So at the beginning with those lush flowing chords, a lot of chromatic motion and everything, you'll notice they are really, really not attached to anything. Okay, they're super free to move about. Rhythmically, there's not really any way to transcribe it. In fact, in the transcription, at least the one by Jacob Martin, it's basically just like, well, this is an approximation because there really is no rhythm here. That is an interesting device. So when you have a solid rhythm, I mean, we are locked in to this. They are super, super, super locked into that, which means that Cory over top, as he's playing these lush chords, he, in the same way as the harmony, is not tied rhythmically to anything because the rhythm section has got that locked down. They're not going anywhere. They're going to keep it locked down. Okay, and as long as this is an open section, who cares about 4, 8, 16 bars, 32, keeping it inside of a traditional context in terms of framing? No one cares about that. If you have an open 4-chord sequence that is just going to go around and around and around and around until somebody cues moving on to the next section, you can really do whatever you want. I mean, you can just float. And that's what we see at the beginning of Cory's solo with those floating, sliding chords, those beautiful chromatic-based chords on the Rhodes. They're gorgeous. I mean, that to me is almost more exciting than the solo itself because it's just such rich, lush harmony. And rhythmically, it's not tied to anything. And that is really, really cool because it gives you this total like, we're just kind of meandering. There's nothing, we're not tied to anything. We're not saying anything specific. We're just floating around. What a great device. And we see that used in a lot of ways. And even once he starts the solo on the synthesizer, the single line solo, he still utilizes part of that sound. And it takes a while before he starts really locking into an 8th note or a 16th note progression line, et cetera, whatever. A lot of those rhythmic devices that he uses later on, which are more angular, they're more concrete. In the beginning, man, he's just floating. He's just floating over top of the harmony and really playing very, very freely, which is the same as what's happening in the harmony, which is why that sounds so interesting to listen to, despite it being 4 very, very similar mono kind of sound chords. So we're gonna do this really quick. I'm gonna plug in just that bass line loop, and I'm gonna try to demonstrate this sort of free, kind of not rhythmically tied to anything, not harmonically tied to anything. And I'm gonna kind of meander and just play a little bit on this so that you can kind of see all the things that we've just talked about. What might that sound like in application? Now, full disclaimer, I'm just not Cory Henry, so don't expect it to sound like that. But hopefully I'll be able to demonstrate a few of the concepts that we've been talking about, just kind of give you some ideas as to like, well, this is very, very free. What could I do? What could I try? What could I approach, to kind of give an interesting sound? And remember that you are free to do whatever you want. And it's all about discovering those different sounds that sound interesting to you and finding ways to work in and out of them, finding ways to work away from the tonal center and then work your way back to the tonal center. And over time you discover transitional devices, harmonic devices that will help you achieve all of that and will ultimately mean that you can play 1 chord or 4 different chords that are almost exactly the same, and you can have a very, very interesting, harmonically diverse solo. All right, so we're gonna plug in this loop. We're gonna plug in, and then I'm just gonna play over this a little bit. So let's try that. So that's really just kind of, you know, messing around, but you can see how some of these chords that are totally different than the harmonic overall context of the chord progression in the vamp, some of these chords sound really cool, you know, and if you really kind of work out, you know, the shape of them, and you kind of figure out, I'd have to spend some time in my brain just kind of figure out what I like, what works there that I would want to use, and then navigating that on a linear basis, being able to freely play, you know, lines and things like that in these chords. You know, you can work a lot of that stuff out and figure out how to play some really cool stuff over not a lot of harmonic information. So Cory Henry's solo is obviously one of the most prolific that we have seen in jazz in a very long time. I mean, obviously it's had a tremendous impact. I mean, so many people have made videos, you know, either trying to play it or analyze it, and you know, it is just a fantastic example of any type of playing music ever. It's just fantastic. So, you know, I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about maybe some of the different ways we can take some of those ideas and learn how to play music that doesn't contain a whole lot of harmonic context, and how we can make that interesting. You know, like you may have before, I've also felt extremely bored with the same old progressions, especially when they are like this and all the chords kind of sound the same. You begin to feel trapped, and you're really looking for a way to just create something more interesting. And so a lot of this is definitely a way that you can approach doing that. And I would highly recommend just don't be afraid to test things out. They're gonna sound weird. They're potentially gonna sound really bad. But you're gonna find all that out by testing, and you're gonna find all that out, and you're gonna decide what you like and what you don't like, and you'll just keep what you like. So anyways, like I said in the beginning, this was not meant to be an in-depth, here's the transcription or here's an analysis of every note. Because I think there are some really fantastic resources that are already out there available on YouTube that you should go check out. Like I mentioned at the beginning, David Bruce has a great video on this solo, David Bruce Composer on YouTube. Please go check that out. And then also the transcriptions from David Rogers and Jacob Martin, who did fantastic jobs deciphering all of that stuff, including some of the more lush, elaborate chords in the beginning as well. So, and there have been many more transcriptions. I'm probably leaving many out. Those are just the ones that I personally know about. So I highly recommend going and checking all that out if you want to either play this solo specifically, or go and bounce it off some of the things that we've talked about here today and see, okay, well, what's Cory doing here specifically that is, you know, that is utilizing some of these concepts of, well, we have a single chord, a single sound, you know, 4 chords that are all very similar. How do we make that interesting? And obviously the result was Cory made it interesting. So yeah, that's kind of it. And we can talk a lot more about this type of stuff in the long run. You know, I like these videos to be a little more raw, where we can kind of just go for a longer period of time and dive into things. I hope that you enjoyed it. Please, I'm very curious to know your comments and your questions. Hit me up in, you know, YouTube comments, Twitter, wherever. Yeah, we're gonna do more of this. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you could maybe get something out of it. And thank you so much for coming over to Nebula to check out the content over here. And we're gonna be doing a lot more. So I'm very excited for that. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.